Everyone knew Daniel Hayes. The charming smile, the captivating blue eyes, the Hollywood heartthrob who could do no wrong. He'd starred in blockbuster after blockbuster, won every award imaginable, and had millions of adoring fans. But no one knew the real Daniel. Not even me, his longtime assistant and closest confidant. It began on the night of his latest movie premiere. We were at the after party, a glamorous affair at some upscale mansion, with chandeliers casting soft light and music humming in the background. Daniel had just stepped away from a conversation to grab a drink when a woman approached him, beautiful but strangely unsettling, with eyes that seemed too dark and deep. She whispered something in his ear and handed him a small, ornate box before disappearing into the crowd. I only saw a glimpse of her, but the look on Daniel's face stuck with me, a mix of shock and dread. After the party, Daniel seemed different, distant. When I asked him about the woman, he brushed it off, saying it was just some fan. But I caught glimpses of that box from time to time, peeking out from his desk drawer or sitting on the nightstand in his private suite. He wouldn't talk about it, and I didn't press, at least not until the dreams started. One night, I woke to find Daniel standing over my bed. His eyes were wide, almost vacant, and his skin looked pale under the moonlight filtering through the window. "She's coming," he said in a voice that didn't quite sound like his. "She won't stop until I open it." Then he turned and left, walking back to his room as if nothing had happened. When I asked him about it the next morning, he looked at me like I was crazy. He had no memory of being in my room. The sleepwalking continued. Each night, I found him in stranger places, out by the pool, in the garage, or even the basement, muttering to himself about the debt. He would always deny it the next day, and his behavior only grew more erratic. He wasn't sleeping, and his once charming demeanor faded, replaced by a cold, distant expression. Then, one night, he showed me the box. He finally opened up about that woman and what she'd whispered to him at the party. "She said it belonged to me," Daniel confessed, "that I'd left it with her a long time ago, and now it was time to pay." I didn't understand. How could a celebrity like Daniel have anything to do with a mysterious woman like that? The box was small, no bigger than a jewelry case, made of dark wood, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It had a lock, but there was no keyhole, just a strange circular indentation on the front. As I reached out to touch it, a chill ran through my fingers, as if it was sucking the warmth right out of my skin. Daniel recoiled from it, refusing to explain what was inside. "I can't," he muttered, his voice breaking. "It's not ready yet." Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's condition worsened. He looked gaunt, hollow, as if something was draining the life out of him. It wasn't just the sleepwalking now. He would disappear for hours, only to return with no memory of where he'd been. And the box, it kept appearing in places it shouldn't have been, even when I knew he hadn't taken it with him. One evening, I heard a voice coming from his room. It was low and melodic, like a lullaby sung from the depths of a well. I opened the door and found Daniel on the floor, clutching the box to his chest. The voice was coming from inside it. It was her voice. "Open it," she whispered. "Open it, and all will be forgiven." Against my better judgment, I took the box from his trembling hands and pressed my thumb into the circular indentation. The lock clicked, and the lid popped open. The room filled with a frigid wind, and the voice grew louder, echoing like a scream inside my skull. Inside the box was nothing, just darkness, an endless, consuming void. I stared into it, and it felt like the darkness was staring back. As I struggled to close it, a hand, cold and decayed, reached out from the blackness and grabbed my wrist, pulling me forward. I managed to wrench myself free and slam the lid shut. Daniel was gone. I searched everywhere, but he had vanished without a trace. The police found no signs of struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. To the world, he was simply another celebrity who mysteriously disappeared. I left the box behind in his mansion, too terrified to bring it with me. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear her voice, whispering from the shadows, calling me to finish what I started.
The rain was coming down hard, pounding against the windshield and making the road ahead look like a blurry mess. I had no business driving in that kind of weather, but I needed to get home. I was tired, frustrated, and just wanted to put the day behind me. The highway was nearly empty, and the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers was oddly calming. It happened so fast. One moment, the road stretched ahead, dark and lonely, and the next, I saw headlights coming straight at me. A car was on the wrong side of the road, speeding directly toward me. I swerved hard to avoid it, my tires screeching on the slick pavement, and lost control. The car spun, and there was a sickening crunch of metal as I slammed into the guardrail. When the car came to a stop, I was dazed, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. Everything was eerily quiet, except for the rain tapping on the roof. I took a shaky breath and glanced out the window, expecting to see the other car somewhere down the road. But there was nothing. It was like it had vanished into the night. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart and make sense of what had just happened. My headlights illuminated the guardrail, and in their beam I noticed something strange, a figure standing in the rain. It was a woman, soaked and shivering, with long, dark hair clinging to her face. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, the kind you'd see in old photographs, and she was staring right at me. Her eyes were wide, and her expression was a mix of fear and sadness. I didn't know what to think. Was she hurt? Did she need help? I fumbled to open the door and stepped out into the downpour, calling out to her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I shouted over the rain, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring, unmoving, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I took a step toward her, and that's when she turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark woods at the side of the road. I hesitated for a moment before following her. I didn't know why, but I felt like I needed to find her to make sure she was okay. I pushed through the trees, stumbling over roots and mud, my clothes quickly soaking through. The deeper I went, the darker it became, until I could barely see anything. The sound of the rain was muffled by the dense canopy above, and the air grew colder. Then I saw it, a crumpled car, half buried in the brush. Its windshield was shattered and the front end was wrapped around a tree. My stomach twisted as I recognized the make and model. It was the same car that had swerved into my lane. I approached slowly, dread sinking into my bones. The driver's side door was open, hanging loosely on its hinges, and there inside the car was the woman I had just seen. She was slumped over the steering wheel, her dark hair hiding her face, the white dress stained with blood. My heart raced as I backed away, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. She wasn't alive. She hadn't been alive when I saw her on the road. I turned to run, but as I did, I saw her standing there again, just a few feet away. This time, her eyes were different. Empty, hollow, filled with a darkness that seemed to swallow all the light around us. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice like the wind rustling through dead leaves. "Now you're part of it." Before I could react, the world spun and I felt a sharp pain in my head. Everything went black. I woke up in my car, the engine still running, the rain still falling. My head throbbed and there was a metallic taste in my mouth. I glanced around, but there was no sign of the crumpled car, no sign of the woman in white, just the empty highway stretching into the night. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream, a hallucination from the shock of the accident. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a faint handprint on the fogged-up glass right behind the driver's seat. And from the back seat, I heard a quiet whisper, "You're part of it now."
When I first found the soap at a local flea market, it was tucked away in a dusty corner. The vendor, an elderly woman with a crooked smile, insisted it was special, claiming it had restorative properties. The label, faded and worn, read, "Ever clean, reveal your true self." The scent was oddly sweet, like honey mixed with something metallic. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just a gimmick. Besides, it was only $5, so I decided to give it a try. That night, I eagerly lathered up in the shower, letting the soap's silky foam coat my skin. It felt smooth, even soothing, and my skin tingled pleasantly as I scrubbed away. I stepped out of the shower feeling refreshed, my skin glowing as though I'd just had a spa treatment. The next morning, I noticed my skin was flawless, no redness, no dry patches, and the little scar on my arm had completely vanished. I couldn't believe it. The soap was actually working miracles. I began using it every day, and each time, my skin looked better than the last. But soon, I started noticing the changes weren't all good. It began with a small patch on my wrist where the skin seemed thinner, almost translucent. I thought I was imagining it, but over the next few days, the patch spread, revealing veins and tendons that pulsed beneath the surface. I could see the intricate web of blood vessels, as if my skin had become a sheet of fragile glass. I tried to stop using the soap, but by then, it was too late. Even with regular soap, every time I showered, the water seemed to strip away more of my skin. It felt like I was unraveling layer by layer. I could see parts of my body that shouldn't have been visible, the thin film over my muscles, even faint outlines of bones. My skin was disappearing, leaving me exposed. Desperate, I returned to the flea market to find the old woman, but she was gone, and the stall was empty. No one seemed to remember her being there at all. Panic set in as I realized I had no way to reverse what had started. The worst part came a week later. I woke up one morning, and my skin wasn't just thin, it was missing in places. I could feel the air on my raw muscles, see the pinkish tissue glistening under the bathroom light. My reflection in the mirror was a nightmare, parts of my face stripped down to muscle and sinew. I searched everywhere for answers, but no one had ever heard of Everclean. The soap, now an almost empty bar, seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, mocking me from its place on the shower shelf. I dared to touch it one last time, and as soon as I did, it began to dissolve, melting away as though it had never existed. Now, I'm left hiding from the world, my body unraveling more each day. I can feel myself breaking down, and no amount of creams or bandages can stop it. The soap may have cleansed my skin, but it was stripping away something far deeper, my very being.
My name is Alex, and this is how a simple watch became the worst mistake of my life. It started in an old, dimly lit antique store I stumbled upon downtown. It was one of those places where dust seemed to hang in the air, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. Among the clutter of forgotten objects, a silver watch caught my eye. It lay inside a glass display case, its surface polished to a shine that seemed out of place. The watch had a faint ticking, rhythmic and steady, yet somehow off. The moment I laid eyes on it, a peculiar urge pulled me to buy it. The shopkeeper, a frail, sunken-eyed man, didn't hesitate to accept my cash. "You don't need to wind it," he said as I left. "It runs on its own time." The watch felt heavier than it looked, cold against my skin when I first wore it. That night, I noticed something unusual. The ticking, though subtle, seemed to echo throughout my apartment, filling every corner with its maddening rhythm. I ignored it at first, dismissing it as my imagination or the charm of an antique. But it didn't stop. Each passing hour, the ticking grew louder, like it was resonating from the walls. At exactly 3:03 a.m., it went completely silent. I checked the watch. It had stopped. The hands were stuck, pointing at 3:03, as if frozen in time. I tapped the glass face, but nothing changed. The sudden stillness in my apartment felt suffocating, like the quiet before a storm. Then the whispers began. They were faint at first, just a hushed murmur beneath my breath. I thought it was the sound of the pipes or maybe the wind, but it wasn't. The whispers spoke my name. Alex. They came from the watch, a low, drawn-out call, seeping into my ears no matter where I hid it. I threw it in a drawer and stuffed it with clothes, but the sound only grew stronger. When I took it out again, the watch had started ticking once more. But the hands, they weren't moving forward. They were going backwards. Each second felt like it was pulling me in, reversing my heartbeat in sync with the watch's backward march. I could swear I felt my pulse slow, my breath catch in my chest, and the whispers, they were clearer now. They weren't just calling my name, they were telling me things, warning me of a time that I had forgotten, or perhaps never lived at all. The next night, at 3:03 a.m., I woke to a loud, distorted chime. I shot up in bed, the watch clutched in my palm, and the hands spun wildly beneath the glass, pointing at moments that didn't exist. Dates that had no meaning to me. Then a strange memory flashed in my mind, one I couldn't recall ever having. It was of a dark room, a clock on the wall, and the feeling of being watched. I tried getting rid of the watch. I threw it away, buried it in the backyard, even tried smashing it to pieces. But no matter what I did, it would always return, ticking away on my nightstand, unbroken and pristine, as if I had never touched it. And every night, it stopped at 3:03, then ticked backward. The memories, if they were memories, became more vivid. I saw myself in places I had never been, with people I didn't know, all in an endless loop, like the hands of the watch circling back again and again. The whispers turned to screams, their voices pleading with me to set things right. But how could I? I didn't know what I had done, or if I had done anything at all. Tonight, as I sit here with the watch ticking in my hand, I can feel time slipping away from me. It's no longer counting backwards, it's unraveling. The walls of my apartment are fading into a haze, dissolving into that same dark room from the memories. The clock on the wall strikes 3:03, and I realize what's happening. I've been here before. This is the place where time stopped for me long ago. Now the watch ticks for one last time, and I know that when the hands reach midnight, there will be no more rewinding.
I'd been craving a break from the city, so I decided to go hiking in the countryside. It was a remote trail, the kind only locals knew about, winding through dense woods and open fields. I'd hiked dozens of trails before, but this one felt different, isolated, almost forgotten. It was perfect. As I walked deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler, and the canopy of trees thickened overhead. The trail narrowed, and I had to push past overgrown branches, which scratched my arms like the desperate fingers of a forgotten soul. It was then that I noticed something odd. The birds had stopped chirping. The only sound was the crunch of my footsteps on the dry leaves. About an hour into the hike, I saw an old wooden sign, barely legible from decay. It read, Hollow Vale, 3 miles. I'd never heard of the place, but I was curious. I followed the path, and soon the woods opened up into a vast field. Tall grass swayed in the breeze, and scattered wildflowers dotted the landscape. At first glance, it seemed like a peaceful valley, but the longer I stared, the more I noticed a subtle wrongness. The grass moved against the wind, like it was swaying to some invisible rhythm. As I ventured further into Hollow Vale, I spotted an old stone well at the center of the field. Its stones were covered in moss, and a crude wooden lid lay askew on top. Something drew me toward it, an uneasy curiosity gnawing at me. I peered inside, but it was too dark to see anything. I took a small rock and dropped it into the well, listening for the splash. But there was no splash. Instead, there was a faint rustling, as though something had shifted deep below. A voice echoed up from the darkness, a whisper too faint to make out. I stepped back, my pulse quickening. Then I noticed the trail was gone. I turned in circles, but the path that led me here had vanished, swallowed by the tall grass. I decided to head in the direction I thought I'd come from, pushing through the thick undergrowth. But no matter how far I walked, I kept ending up back at that well. The lid had shifted slightly each time, moving farther open. It felt like the ground itself was pulling me toward it. And then the whispers started again, louder now. My name, spoken over and over in a chorus of raspy voices. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The whispers were inside my head, urging me to look into the well, to climb down. It was like the darkness was alive, hungry for me to come closer. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tilt, forcing me toward the open maw of the well. I stumbled, grabbing the edge to stop myself from falling. That's when I saw it. A pale hand emerging from the shadows within, fingers long and bony, reaching for me. The whispers turned into a chilling chant, calling me to join them in the darkness. I jerked away and ran as fast as I could, not caring where I went, just as long as it was far from that place. Somehow, I made it back to the woods. The birds were singing again, and the trail reappeared, clear as day. But when I looked back, the field was gone. There was no sign of Hollow Vale, no old well, nothing. Just a dense wall of trees. I never found that place again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers, calling me back.